Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Catholic Culture Podcast. Today is going to be more or less the Christmas episode for this year and the last episode of 2022. And we'll be talking about, well, not only Christmas, but solemnities in general. My guest today wrote a book on solemnities and how to celebrate each solemnity throughout the year. So we'll be talking specifically today about the solemnities of late December, early January, Christmas, Mary, the Mother of God, and Epiphany. My guest today, one of whom was on recently, Denis McNamara, an associate professor and executive director for the Center for Beauty and Culture at Benedictine College, and author of multiple books on sacred architecture, which is what we talked about last time. He's also a co-host of the Liturgy Guys podcast. Welcome back, Denis.
Thanks. Happy to be with you again, Thomas.
My other guest, one of the co-authors of this book, Christopher Carstens, is director for the Office of Sacred Worship for the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin, visiting faculty member at the Liturgical Institute at the University of St. Mary of the Lake in Mundelein, Illinois, and the editor of the Adoramus Bulletin, and also the author of books on the liturgy, and another co-host on the Liturgy Guys. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks, Thomas, very much.
And the third co-author I'll just mention, since she's not here for the record, is Alexis Kutarna. And the book is Solemnities, Celebrating a Tapestry of Divine Beauty. A really beautifully designed book, and, artworks, reproductions of great artworks plays a major role in it, but it's got a number of different aspects. So maybe if you could just give me an overview of the structure of the book before we get into the details.
Sure. I'll start unless you want to, Denis.
Go ahead, Chris.
This book is about the 17 solemnities of the liturgical year, and each one is in three parts. Each chapter is in three parts. The first part, which I penned, is about sort of the liturgical, historical, spiritual origins and content of each solemnity. So it relies in my section on very heavily on the liturgical text, either from the Mass or from the office or the breviary. The second or middle portion of the of each solemnity was written by Denis, and it's he's chosen a beautiful work of art from either the tradition or in some cases contemporary art, and explained the solemnity in light of how it's illustrated. Right, so it's we can pray along and understand more clearly that part. The third half of of each chapter is written by Alexis, and she has explained how you can take the solemnity from 55 minutes worth of Mass or something like that, or beyond a particular piece of art and actually live it. Either in the workplace, in the home, in what you do through hymns, through traditions, through foods, through other practices. So these are the three parts of each of the 17 chapters.
Yeah, and so today, of course, we'll be starting with Christmas, but of course, Christmas, of all of the solemnities, is probably the one that people already have the most sort of family traditions around and the most sort of an idea of how to celebrate. But, if any of my listeners get the book, that you may be even more helped by, some of the discussions of solemnities later on in the year that we won't be talking about here, because they're things that maybe in a solidly Catholic culture, there might be all sorts of, festivities associated with, but here in America, we might not be as familiar with some of the ways of celebrating those things.
Right. And part of the reason Ascension Press, this was their idea. This book was an idea they thought up. They thought that, there's 17 solemnities in the church year. And I don't know that I could have, won $1 million on a game show if someone said, how many solemnities are there, before doing this book. And some of them are what we might think of as obscure. The Nativity of St. John the Baptist is a solemnity. And a solemnity is the highest level feast in the church year. There's sort of ordinary weekdays, and then there's memorials and then feasts and then solemnities. And so this is something the church has decided is one of the most important feasts of the church year. And nobody really pays too much attention to it. It's not a holy day of obligation. And so it's the only one of three birthdays that's celebrated in the church year. Christmas for Christ, of course, and then the Nativity of the Virgin Mary on September 8th, and then the Nativity of John the Baptist. The only three birthdays in the whole church year, and it's one of them that most people never even pay attention to. So it's a good idea. This book is just really, hopefully will enrich people's experience of their liturgical life.
So, well, let me ask this then, since you guys are the liturgy guys, or some of them anyway. This is the highest feast, the highest type of feast, as you mentioned. But did the church always rank feasts in the way that it's done presently?
Not as far as I know. I wish I did know. The calendar immediately before the council is, I'm sorry to say, something I haven't dove into and understood as fully as I can. But it was, maybe it's just because I'm familiar with the current system of Sundays, solemnities, feasts, memorials, optional memorials, and weekdays. But there were doubles of the first class. And so I suppose if this book would have been written 100 years ago, it would have been something like doubles of the first class, celebrating a tapestry of divine beauty or something like that. And even Sundays, there were greater Sundays and lesser Sundays, and those had further divisions. So yes, Thomas, the church did, not every day was created equal. And it wasn't a homogeneous type of liturgical year, but the classification throughout the centuries has certainly changed. I don't know that our current one is reaching back to a particular century, but it's hard to understand the preconciliar calendar, at least in my mind.
Right. People say you needed something like a canon lawyer or a calendar lawyer to figure out, what you were supposed to do on certain dates. You see these big charts in the old books, if this,
Right.
then that, and
Yes.
and sometimes the days would land on the same day, and you'd have to do parts of one and parts of the other, and it was a very complicated thing. But the basic issue is time, right? And so, there's a great little book by a Notre Dame professor named David Fagerberg called The Christian Meaning of Time. And he mentions the point that time is a creature. It's something God created. He's outside of time, right? He doesn't need a calendar year. But time is something he created in his mercy for us to have the opportunity to choose him because of our fallen intellect. And so we have different units of time. You have liturgy of the hours in each day. Then you have different days of the week. Then you have weeks of the year. And then they form seasons or they form octaves. And then, the whole season comes around again the next year. And you're a year older, so you understand them differently. And you celebrate them again and again. So the calendar can be, subdivided one way or another. But the basic premise is that the mysteries of the salvation story are presented to us over and over again as something to be lived and experienced and understood liturgically and otherwise. And some are more important than others, just how it happens to be. And the solemnities are the ones the church has pulled out to be the ones they really want us to concentrate on.
Yeah, and I actually just got a Latin Mass missal for myself recently, and so I've been looking at those, those semi doubles and all the different rankings. If one thing jumps out at me to how things were different before, it's that there was greater potential on the old calendar for the combination of various feasts and solemnities. I mean, I remember several years ago, it was one of the few instances where the Feast of the Annunciation would normally fall on Good Friday. And, back in the day, they would have celebrated both, which is quite interesting. In fact, there's a poem by John Donne about both because they had fallen on the same day that year, and he's sort of weaving the themes of both together, which is quite fascinating. So even though it's not more streamlined now, there's some sort of interesting things that could happen in terms of meditation, when two different feasts would fall on the same day.
Right. Complexity brings with it all that kind of richness. It also brings a sort of confusion and a tendency often to do the minimum because it's too hard to do the maximum. Sometimes the streamline lets us glide through maybe a little too easily and less contemplatively than when you might have. But that's the calendar we've been given after many years of people thinking that the complexity of the calendar needed to be addressed. And so that's where we are. And we still have our solemnities, though, and we still get to ponder the mysteries of salvation.
Right. So, let's go to the first solemnity then that we'll be talking about today. Of course, the Nativity, Christmas. Everybody knows what this is, obviously, on some level. I wanted to ask Christopher, though, I wanted to focus in specifically on this theme you talk about of the Great Exchange. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's this, what do they call it? Admirabile commercium, I think, is the Latin expression that comes up often in the prayers. And it's about, in essence, what it is we gave God the gift of being able to die, and God gave us the gift of being divine. And these are the exchange of gifts. This is that line there is what St. Augustine would say. We gave him the power to die. He gave us the power to live. This is this admirable exchange, this gift exchange that we hear, especially around the Christmas time. And really, I to my mind, this is what should be the underlying meaning of every more superficial type of gift exchange that we do among friends and coworkers and family and things like that. Those are just tokens or expressions of this greater gift exchange between God and us. And that's, that's the meaning of the season right there.
Yeah, well, I liked the way that you drew a lot from the fathers and doctors of the church, and also from the readings and the prayers of the liturgy for these feasts in a way that really enriches the reflections, because it's all, a lot of that stuff is already sort of laid out for us by the church. So, as great as, devotional writing is, you can also just look at the prayers and readings that are set before us on the given day to find some great stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one great lesson, about this. I mean, the church is a mother and a teacher, and she teaches us in a very privileged way through the liturgy. So again, sometimes I'll tell, my students, it's not like I'm pouring through the corpus of readings from Leo the Great or something like that. This is not liturgical arcane knowledge. I'm just lifting stuff right out of the liturgy. It's actually pretty simple. Just take what the church wants you to know and learn from it. So, and that's what all of these, the chapters, these initial parts of each chapter, it's right out of the liturgy of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything else about the theology of Christmas that maybe people don't think about as much that we should be aware of?
Yeah, maybe just one thing, since you brought it up, Thomas, is this March 25th, when the Annunciation and Good Friday fall on the same day. These are the reason that those things clash sometimes is that the Annunciation we celebrate on March 25th, and that it was held. I think I read this in a Cardinal Ratzinger book sometime, that a famous person would die on the date of his conception as well. So it's not random by any means that those fall on the same date, and that we celebrate Christmas precisely because we celebrate the death of Jesus on March 25th and the conception of Jesus on March 25th. 9 months after the conception is what we're heading into right now, the Christmas season. And so when people wonder about, well, where did Christmas come from? And was it, invented to combat, the Sol Invictus or something like that, the sun god? Maybe. I mean, these, pagan peoples had an instinct that nature was telling them something about the light coming into the world at this time of year. But one thing, I guess, to keep in mind about the theology of Christmas is that it takes its roots from the conception and death of Jesus back on March 25th.
Wow. So let's talk about this first artwork that you've selected, Denis, and that would be the Mystic Nativity by Sandro Botticelli. Where can one see this painting in person?
Well, it's actually in the National Gallery in London, and it's a very tiny little painting. It's only 30 inches high, so it's not a big giant painting, but there's a lot of stuff packed in there.
Great. Yeah, because I was in Italy earlier this year, and I was looking at a bunch of Botticelli paintings, but I was not familiar with this one, and it's really beautiful. So, well, let me ask more broadly, how did you go about selecting the paintings for this book?
Well, you have to write about something, and you have a Hallmark card picture of a beautiful Mary with rouge on her cheeks and nice lipstick holding a baby, and you say, okay, well, it's a mother with a child. Well, how can you write about that, right? So I tried to find images that had lots of levels of complexity, lots of levels of meaning, things that could bring in kind of, we think of now as patristic insights, these early Christian understanding of things, rather than just a predictable scene of a snowy mountain in a manger. But this one in particular, the mystic nativity, has the sky open up to this golden vision of heaven. There's angels in a circle. There's secondary figures doing all kinds of interesting things in the background. Mm-hmm. And I figured if I can find something interesting in all of these things, then the readers will find those interesting as well.
All right. So what should we be taking note of in particular in this painting?
Well, it's called a mystic nativity for various reasons. It's not just a birth, but it's this birth that connects heaven and earth. And so here's the great admirable exchange, right? That, the birth of Christ unites heaven and earth. You have these angels going around in a circle into this sort of golden portal into heaven. They're actually holding little lilies, or olive branches actually, with ribbons on them. And the olive branches are this sign of peace between God and humanity. Remember, the dove brings the olive branch to the ark, and God says, I'll never destroy the world again. And they're hanging with little ribbons of paper that have honorific titles of the Virgin Mary, spouse of the Holy Spirit, all this kind of thing. So there's this notion of the Virgin Mary's role in this, that heaven and earth are united, that Christ taking on two natures, humanity and divinity, means that humanity can then go back up into this golden portal. It's a sort of space tube, into the life of the Trinity. And then there's all kinds of other things going on in there, right? There's this cave, right, which is dark, and this sort of stable out front. And the cave has a lot of interesting meaning in the way you think about it. It's a dark hole in the ground, right? So it has this sense of being like hell. At the same time, a cave is a place you find if you're out in the wild and you need some protection. And so it's this place of darkness, but it's also a place of safety. And that's one of the traditional things, is that Christ was born into the darkness of the earth, just like he would later go to harrow hell and destroy the power of death. So in traditional icons, you'll often see black paint as the cave. It's the only place black appears in icons, is this absence of God's presence. And then Christ, the light, is born directly in there. One of the things I loved learning about this is that the Virgin Mary stands in the center, and on one side is a donkey, and there's also an ox. And these were two animals that you often see, and you think, well, these are the kind of animals you have in a stable, big deal. But as it turns out, the ox was a licit, a lawful animal for sacrifice because of the cloven hoof. The donkey was not, right? So the donkey was an unclean animal. And so you have these two animals that represent sort of the Jewish law of the temple tradition. And then you also have the Gentiles who are not clean, so to speak, but then nonetheless, they're being redeemed by Christ as well. And so, we get used to looking at a barnyard scene with baby Jesus in it, but then when you really start to pay attention, there's a lot of symbolic meaning that happens there.
And what about these figures at the very bottom?
Is that the angels and the humans embracing? Is that
these embracing figures here.
Right. And, Botticelli signed this work. It's his only signed work ever, so they think it might have something very personal to him. He was also a great devotee of Savonarola and all of his preaching about the ends of the world and everything. So they think this was his vision of kind of the apocalypse in a way. And so the idea that mercy and kindness have met, the earth is providing humanity, the dust of the earth of Adam, and then they're being braced by these figures of God's love and mercy. And again, it's that same notion, these angels representing divinity, or the gift of God coming down, meeting humanity, and they're embracing. If you see on the two outer corners, they're two kind of caricature-looking little demons that are, actually there's more than two. They're seeing their plan defeated, and they're in horror, and they're fearful that their plan is being defeated. And so it's one of these paintings. An architect friend of mine told me once that a good building rewards you for close inspection. The back of a Walmart does not reward you for close inspection, right? But a good church will. You see details and carvings. And a painting is like that too. There's the primary scene, and then there's these secondary things and different kinds of narratives. Christ the child's laid out on a sheet with his arms up, and in front of the cave, and that's an anticipation of his time in the tomb, when he'll be laid on a sheet, naked in the tomb. So it's this anticipation of the resurrection. So a smart painter will give all these really interesting details that give you a lot to think about and a lot to preach about.
Yeah, I like in this painting too, just compositionally, the way that it sort of widens out at the top of the bottom and sort of narrows in the middle. especially with the shape of this cave, sort of reaching a peak and then widening out again with the circle of angels at the top. It's a nice kind of shape there.
Right. And Botticelli's one of the great painters of the Renaissance. His great paintings are, in the great museums of the world. And if someone's painting a very particular, personal, very small devotional image for themselves, they're going to spend lots of time on this. And, he was, at the height of his powers at this time. And there's so much in it. And it's just a really rich and beautiful thing to look at.
Okay. So like I said, people have a lot of Christmas traditions already, but I know that the person who wrote this part of the book isn't here, but are there anything that, anything that people should particularly take note of that maybe it's not as common or people it could enrich people's celebration of Christmas further?
Well, I'll say one thing that came to my mind. So it's been great to work on this book with Denis and Alexis. Not only did I learn things writing my parts, but I learned a lot of stuff from what they had written as well. The one thing that Alexis discovered from her is this tradition of the Christmas tree, how St. Boniface came across these people who were worshiping an oak tree, she writes, and to disabuse them of their false worship, he cut it down, and they thought the god Thor was behind. They were worshiping Thor through this oak tree, and a pine tree grew back. And so I thought, well, we've watched Thor Ragnarok too many times in the Carstens family. So my kids know who Thor is. And so I'm going to take this occasion as we decorate our tree. And we're one of those, I don't know, weirdo Catholic families or normal Catholic families. I don't know what we are at this point, where we tried it. We delay getting the tree. We delay decorating the tree. So it's still not up. But before we decorate it, I'm going to tell them this story about St. Boniface and Thor. And she points out there's a blessing in the Christmas tree that can be used. And so I've never used it before, but we're going to do our best to use that in the Carstens household, at least this coming year.
Nice. Yeah, I remember my dad would always bless the tree every Christmas. Yeah, I don't know what blessing, if he used this. I guess it was probably this blessing that's in the book here that he used. But let's talk about the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, which, as you pointed out, had a number of different titles, one of which was the Circumcision of the Lord. Would this be the old calendar title of the feast, or is it just an alternate still today, or?
That is a good question. I think I identified it as a traditional title. I don't know. So, hey, the tradition is ours in 2022 as much as it has been. I don't know, though, that it's actually printed in the Missal like the octave of Christmas is actually printed right there in the Missal. So I don't know the answer to that question, Thomas, but yeah, it has meaning if you want to think about it. What one of the things that I discovered is that it's the same gospel passage as had been used at Christmas, with the addition of one extra sentence that has to do with Jesus being circumcised after the Magi had left. And okay, so like Denis says, good architecture, good art, being attentive to the readings pays pays dividends. And so you think, all right, well, what's the church want me to hear by this extra little line? And I think, from the, I tried to read, I read all of these texts and almost did kind of a lectio with all of these liturgical texts and just sort of saw what came up to the surface. And one of them was just, this is a very human day, that our Catholicism is not pure abstract spirituality, but it's so incarnate. And it seems this Mary, Mother of God, kind of doubles down on the incarnation theme that we had celebrated 8 days before. And one of the ways it does that is to call it and to be aware of the circumcision of Jesus.
Right. And of course, circumcision continues to have all of this spiritual meaning, beyond the ritual, the Old Testament aspect of it. In Christianity, it has this meaning, the circumcision of the heart kind of thing. Yeah. On a spiritual level, which means, I guess, not making no provision for the desires of the flesh, that sort of thing. And so Jesus becomes flesh, but it also, I guess you could say, it emphasizes this part of the Nativity where he also comes to free us from the inordinate, fallen aspects of living in the flesh.
Yeah. I think when When they talk about baptism and confirmation, they also talk about this sacramental character, and a carrick or a kerison is a pointed. It's an engraving tool. It's a sharp stick that you imagine. The priest engraves the Paschal candle or the crosses that are cut upon the altar, and so one of the, I don't know, I guess if this is a prefigurement of the circumcision, is, as you say, of the heart, but also the sacramental character that we receive in baptism and in confirmation and some in holy orders. That conforms us to Christ and gives us that power, Thomas, like you're saying, to live not according to the flesh, but according to Christ, in whose image we're being remade by these sacraments and by the liturgy.
Let's talk about this octave of Christmas thing a little bit more, because one of the difficulties of celebrating Christmas today for Catholics is that the schedule that we use is really out of joint with the secular Christmas schedule, which, as you observe, is starting right after Thanksgiving, essentially now, and ending on December 25th, whereas our Christmas begins on Christmas Eve, right, and proceeds for about another month, maybe more after that, but especially with a special intensity within this octave of Christmas. So what are some ways that people can continue to celebrate Christmas? What are some ways that people can differentiate their celebration, first of all, from the worldly Christmas calendar, and what are ways that people can then continue to celebrate a festive Christmas during the whole Christmas season?
Yeah. Well, I don't know the answer to that. I know what we try and fail to do in our own, house is just to resist celebrating Christmas on December 15th and the 16th, whether it's the tree or, the ubiquitous Christmas movies and things like that. If you can imagine celebrating Easter 3 weeks into Lent, Easter is going to be a flop, for you spiritually. And I think same for Christmas. So that'd be the first thing, is just resist the temptation to buy in to kind of the secular reckoning of how Christmas works. Then when Christmas comes, then you're ready to celebrate it for 8 days or 12 days or 40 days or however many that may be. But I think it just takes a lot of discipline and intentionality not to do things before Christmas, but then when Christmas comes to, I don't know, my office is closed for a week between Christmas and New Year's. I've got a lot of time. Go to Mass if I haven't been doing that. Eucharistic adoration. Take that time where we have a little bit of leisure to do those things that I say to myself the rest of the year that, if I had more time, then I would do X, Y, or Z. So I don't know what the formula is, but it's just ongoing efforts in that direction.
Well, let's talk about the painting for this solemnity. Madonna in the Church by Jan van Eyck. Now, this is a piece that maybe is deceptively simple. You wouldn't think that there's as much to talk about looking at it as there was with the previous painting that we just discussed, but you find quite a lot of interesting details if you look closely.
Right. Jan van Eyck, is he's a Northern Renaissance painter, and he's famous for this incredible level of detail. This painting is 12 inches high, right? So it's a tiny little painting, and yet the detail is amazing. And that's what he was known for: the gems, fabric, garments, angels, things in the background. They've even found spider webs in the detail of this church up in the ceiling level. It's like, well, what is this guy trying to do? There's an intense realism to this. Like, you really see real looking things, and at the same time it has this immense mystical quality, because if Mary were really standing in this church, she'd be about 40 feet high, right? She's this gigantic figure in the church, is at a totally different scale. And part of the reason I picked that is because Mother of God is a very serious claim. There's lots of arguments, even today, about was she just the mother of Christ's humanity? And of course, they settled this in one of the councils of Nicaea, Mother of God. And that's an important thing. So I wanted to show her as this sort of queen figure, this giant figure. Nobody knows why Jan van Eyck painted this, so they just call it Madonna at Church because that's where she is. But if you look in the background, You can see through the rood screen or the screen into the sanctuary, and there are a couple of angels back there with a book in their hand, and the presumption is that they're singing some kind of liturgical feast of the Virgin Mary. She's Queen of Angels, she's Queen of Heaven, and so even the angels are praising her. Over her left shoulder is the actual little shrine in the church of the Virgin Mary holding the child, Jesus. And there's two candles lit next to that. So there's this kind of play between the sort of sacramental image of the Virgin Mary, or the sort of, statue figure, and then this kind of reality of the humanity of the Virgin Mary with this crown of immensely detailed gold and gems. And it's not painted with metallic paint or gold leaf. It's just paint. And the reflectivity of it is quite amazing. You see the details of the gems on her cuffs on her arms, and then down at the bottom near her feet, the bottom of her dress, there's text embroidered along there. And it's just an amazing little thing. And that's what Van Eyck is known for, is this amazing level of detail. But then scholars have looked through it too and found other things. There's these two spots of light that you see about 2/3 of the way down on the right side of the painting, as if the light is coming down from the clear story window, which is the high windows or the arches on the left. But if you actually look at this carefully, if this were facing east, then the light on the left would not be the south, it would be the north, and you would never have direct lighting coming in, forming pools of light on the floors. So people have interpreted this as the spiritual light that's passing through the glass and then landing there. So it's a supernatural light source. And St. Bernard and other people have talked about the Virgin Mary being like glass, that the light of the Holy Spirit penetrated through her to conceive Christ in her womb without breaking her, so to speak, without destroying her virginity. And so light coming through glass is another image of the Virgin Mary's receptivity and perfection, and being the Virgin Mother of Christ.
Yeah, and this would be a good thing to reflect on when you actually go into a church, is like the reality, the actual presence of, the heavenly host with these angels, and the actual presence of, in some sense, the spiritual presence of the Mother of God when we invoke her, and of course of Jesus. But that having Mary and Jesus juxtaposed with the statue in the background is quite striking.
Right, and even above that statue, you can see the little triangular pediment above. There's actually a tiny little image in there, too, of the Annunciation, I believe, on the left. And then the coronation of the Virgin Mary is in the carved wooden panel. The one right above the two angels singing is the coronation of the Virgin Mary. So it's another one of these cases where the painting rewards you for close inspection, and it could only be there if the painter put it there and could think of it first. And so this is the kind of thing you can really sit with, and you say, okay, well, that face of Christ and the tenderness, if you look at Christ's little baby hands, he's tugging on the Virgin Mary's collar there in this very intimate sort of mother and child way. If you look at her left hand, she's sort of tickling his feet with her first finger. I mean, this is the kind of an amazing thing that's going on here, like real maternal tenderness, that the Mother of God could hold the second person of the Trinity, and yet this kind of maternal love is there. And then to think that the entire upper torso of Christ with his face and the delicacy of his gestures is the size of your thumbnail. I mean, it's just an amazing thing to do this. And even the fact that the Virgin Mary has long hair is an interesting thing. That was a sign that she was unmarried. So typically the Immaculate Conception will show the Virgin Mary with long hair, that married women would put their hair up, unmarried women let their hair down. And so it's playing this game of her virginity and her being unmarried. Of course, she's married to Joseph, but in the kind of spiritual sense, unmarried. And so she's mother, she's virgin, she's queen, and she's got this loving sort of contemplative humanity, this look on her face. Again, the size of your thumbnail, and to think, how could you capture all that in one tiny little space? It's a real tour de force from the artistic point of view.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would just like to make a comment on this, is that, this book has 3 authors, but it would be a lie to say that Denis and Alexis and I were like sending each other manuscripts, and this is what I wrote for this, and what do you think about that? Oh yeah, this is what I wrote for that. And it didn't happen that way, because life is busy, and all of a sudden they came together. But it's wonderful, I think, that whether you're talking about the liturgical and biblical texts or a great illustration in a work of art, or how these things are lived out, that the message in each of those instances shows itself as consistent. That in this instance, it's about the humanity of Jesus. And, just to hear you talk, Denis, I mean, I never really stopped to think, did Mary tickle Jesus? And I mean, that's such a mother-child human thing to do. But anyway, just again, I think one of the rewards of this is that in each of these sort of media, the text, the art, the living, is that the message comes through in each instance, and it's a rewarding thing.
Right, and I think as authors, the three of us, even though we didn't compare notes, we all had a common connection at the Liturgical Institute at Mundelein. Chris was in our first class, and he taught there. Of course, I taught there for a long, long time. Alexis is a graduate of that program. And so we all had this sacramental vision, this sort of sacramental glasses that we put on, and I think that's why we interpret these things in a similar way.
Right, yeah, that's great. So to talk about how to celebrate this solemnity then, of course, we already talked about the fact that we're in the octave of Christmas, so we're still celebrating Christmas. But I wanted to ask first of all about how to celebrate the Feast of Mary, Mother of God specifically, and secondly, how to deal with the fact that this takes place on January 1st, and so is coinciding with the beginning of the secular New Year.
Yeah. Well, now, Denis, I want to know how you celebrate some of these things too. But for my part, when I was reading this section that Alexis wrote, she talks about the Te Deum. And we were talking about this recently in a class where we were talking about the Liturgy of the Hours. Now, I'll confess, I have never sung the Te Deum. I know it's in the book, and it's to be prayed on solemnities when you do the office of readings, but I've never once in my life sung the Te Deum. In fact, I'm sorry to say that when I think of the Te Deum, I knew this priest who would say, when I was young, we always called it the Tedium, because the thing just went on and on and on. I thought, well, so one of my New Year's resolutions, I guess, is I'm going to sing the Te Deum for the first time, and I'll see if I can enlist some of my kids to help me with this. I'm going to learn it and sing it, and that's going to be how I observe this day. So, Denis, I know you're singing the Te Deum all the time, so you're probably going to do something different.
No, I don't sing it too often, but it does appear in the Liturgy of the Hours, and one of the hours in solemnities. What is it? Morning prayer?
Office of readings.
Office readings, right? And so when I was a novice with the Dominicans for a year, and really lived a liturgical life. I would look forward to the Te Deum, even though it was long. Sort of broke up the pattern. I was actually at an ordination at a very traditional religious community, and when people go to mass, they often will applaud to signify their acceptance of the ordained. But this parish said, we're singing the Te Deum instead. We're going to praise God for these people being ordained. I think you can think of Mary, the Mother of God, that way too, right? The fact that she's Mother of God means she made it possible for humanity and divinity to come together, which is the way we're drawn into the life of the Trinity. So, I know, January 1st, you've been up late. You've been singing Auld Lang Syne at midnight, and like the last thing you want to do is get up early and go to mass. But to say, okay, hey, we're not just going to celebrate a new year; we're going to celebrate a new year in the timeline of redemption, and to honor Mary in her role in that very important part of that process.
And there's another tradition here as well, which is that. There's actually, I don't think the indulgence is mentioned in the book, but there is an indulgence attached to singing the Veni Creator Spiritus, Come Creator Spirit, on January 1st, which I have done. I haven't done the Te Deum at this time, but I have done the Veni Creator Spiritus for the past few years. And I don't remember what kind of indulgence it is, but this is something that the church encourages, imploring the help of the Holy Spirit for the new year as well. So that is something that people should keep in mind as well. And it's a very beautiful chant, so I highly recommend learning that melody as well. Maybe one other thing that we could bring up here is a thread that runs through the book in the sections that Alexis wrote about the idea of a Mary-centered year. And so taking the opportunity with many of these solemnities to increase our devotion to Mary as well, and to stay focused on her.
Go ahead, Denis.
I'm saying go ahead, Chris. Actually, I don't have the book in front of me right now. So
Yeah. Have you even read the book yet?
parts of it, yeah.
Yeah, living a Mary Center year. What better day to begin the new year to help focus as the year comes ahead? Yeah, and it's I was thinking about this in another context. You know, one of the images we see in the secular world sometimes on New Year's Day is the baby ushering in the new year as the old hunched back and aged man leaves 2022. Here's baby 2023, but even that, I think, is this emblem of motherhood and childhood and kind of a fresh start. And I don't know. To my mind, it seems you begin right. January 1st is a celebration of the birth of Jesus as well, and to kind of take yourself back to your own fresh start at the beginning of this year in a spiritual way, and we all make resolutions. Some lose weight or whatever like that, but make these spiritual resolutions as well, and just the fresh start as a child through and with the help of and under the mantle of Mary it's a winning formula. I mean, right? What's that line from Chesterton? It's not like it's been tried and found wanting; it's found difficult, and so you give up on it. But I think with Mary, as she helped Christ, she can help us at the beginning of this year to try it again, just like we did a year ago, but keep after it.
Right. The Immaculate Conception image in the book was painted before the Immaculate Conception was actually defined as dogma. So it was a little bit questionable. It was sort of dangerous territory to portray her as Immaculate Conception. So what the painter did on that one is put these little symbols in the background. One's a mirror, and it's the spotless mirror. So she reflects the light of Christ. She's not a goddess. She's not a source of her own light, but she reflects the light and the graces that are given to her. And then there's another one literally called the Stairway to Heaven. Say what you want about great classic rock, but it's the idea that God came to earth literally through the gateway of her. So that's another image of her, the Janua Coeli. And then we actually get to go back, the way that Christ came. And so just ponder that Marian dimension. It's one thing to be sort of pious about maternal solicitude, and that's fine, right? But to really think in this kind of, I don't want to say it's a masculine way, but in some ways it is. It's kind of a warrior notion that Mary, she crushes the head of the serpent by allowing God to use her to bring Christ into the world. Say, okay, Mary, crush the head of the serpent in me, please. I have these tendencies that I don't want, and I have these habits of sin, or I don't do what I should do, and I do what I shouldn't do, and all that Pauline language. Hey, Virgin Mary, make me the gate to heaven. Bring Christ to me. Allow me to be the light that reflects to others, or the mirror that reflects the light of Christ to others. That'd be a good way to think about pretty much any day of the year, any liturgical feast of any kind. She's this singularly chosen vessel who's chosen to live the Christian life. And so we can do much better to be like her than Giga Chad. Do you guys know about Giga Chad? Have you heard of him?
I think so. Yeah. As a meme,
he's this kind of half computer generated image of this super duper muscular guy that like all the college kids are into as their kind of masculine role model.
Right.
And man, that's not really a great role model. That's all vanity. But here to say, okay, Mary, crush the head of the serpent, make me like that. That's a role model for us all.
Amen. Okay, so January 6th, Epiphany, a lot of really interesting traditions with this feast. I was in Spain at this time of the year. I don't know, 2018? I guess it would have been the beginning of 2019, I think. I happened to be in Seville on the Epiphany, and I arrived just before their Three Kings parade, which is a huge, huge parade, and it gave me a taste of traditions that they have in historically Catholic countries, that we don't have here. I mean, St. Patrick's Day just doesn't in New York City. I'm sorry to say, it just doesn't cut it, by comparison. So Three Kings Day in some countries, especially in Spanish speaking countries, apparently is the big gift giving day. As opposed to Christmas, and that, which obviously makes sense, from a biblical standpoint. But they had this huge parade with the floats with the three kings, and also this other float with somebody called the Wizard of Fantasy, who seemed like, I don't know who that is or where he is in the Bible, but anyway, so there were some weird aspects to it as well, but it was quite impressive. And so Three Kings Day is something that we should not neglect. And one of the traditions, one of the suggestions in this book that I appreciated was the idea of continuing the creche. You know, we didn't mention the Christmas creche, but a lot of people, of course, have the nativity scene, the creche, a tradition supposedly going back to St. Francis. And I liked this idea of having the three kings moving throughout the Christmas season until they arrive at the manger around the crib of Jesus on Epiphany. I think that's a great idea.
It's a lot better than Elf on a Shelf, isn't it? You know, my
right.
nieces and nephews just loved waking up every day and seeing the elf move from one place to the other. It would be much better to have the three wise men get closer to the creche every day.
Right. But yeah, there's also, of course, the famous tradition of the cake. I associate it with New Orleans, the king cake with the tiny figure of Jesus hidden inside, and whoever there's whoever people are trying to find the figurine, get the bite that has the baby Jesus in it. And another big one though is the house blessing. And I don't know. This is something that I knew about because they would do this in my my high school, my Catholic high school in Virginia. They would have one of the teachers would always go around doing the blessing on the various classrooms with students dressed as the three kings accompanying him. And so that was always a fun thing. But I think the first time that I did this was in my own apartment, was a couple of years ago. So maybe for people who aren't familiar with this tradition, can you explain how the Epiphany house blessing works?
Yeah. So the house blessing is above the door, I suppose the main door of the house or your apartment, whatever it is, right? The first two first two numerals of the year, and the second two are on the right, and in the middle you have C plus M plus B. And apparently these are either the initials of the wise men, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, or another interpretation is it's short for something like Christus mansionem benedicat or something. Christ bless this mansion, you live in, Denis, this house. And then there'd be a prayer, and then I think kind of like you were describing in your school, Thomas, going through the house and blessing the rooms with holy water. So yeah, it's this is one of those things that, right, our Rituale Romanum revised after the Second Vatican Council is more popular. It has this section called the Book of Blessings, and it's not in there anywhere, unfortunately, because this is one of those things that is it's very popular. And a lot of the genesis of this book is that these things that have happened in the tradition, not just over the 2,000 years, but for 4,000 years or 5,000. This is as much my story today as it is, anybody's. I mean, these are my traditions, and I think Ascension got the sense that so many of these are just unfamiliar to us in this
right.
day and age, and there's a real hunger for these types of traditions, and I think this is a perfect example of that. Is the household blessing with a chalk on Epiphany.
Yes. Yeah, and there is a whole order, the rite of blessing that you can find online or in the Catholic Household Blessings and Prayers book. It's actually pretty involved and very cool. And another aspect of this that's worth mentioning is the Epiphany water, which I think I only learned about this last year, that there is such a thing as, special holy water with a special blessing for Epiphany. And I remember my parish, which happens to be the one that I think, Denis, you grew up in, St. Vincent Ferrer, in New York City. I remember hearing, we did, like a 40-minute long exorcism on this water. So it's just like supercharged holy water, essentially. I still have a full bottle from last year pretty much, but, so people should, inquire at their parish about getting some of this water, to use, especially in this house blessing and throughout the year. And And I don't know. I don't know if every parish does it or has to do it, but it's a great thing to suggest. Maybe if it's not happening at your parish, to get the priest to do this and make that available to the parishioners.
Yeah, priest exorcist that I know uses only Epiphany water in his exorcisms because he said it has the most blessings, the most things attached to it. And he got permission from his bishop to make it any day of the year. Normally, you can only make it on Epiphany, but he got a special exception to make it any day
nice.
to use in
That's
exorcism.
Great. Okay, what else can we talk about? One other aspect before we get into maybe the theology of Epiphany, or this will help lead us into it, is what happens in Mass on the Solemnity of the Epiphany, where the deacon proclaims the announcement for the date of Easter and the other movable feasts of the year. Now, if Pope Francis ends up getting us on the same page with the Eastern Orthodox for a fixed date of Easter, then we might not be proclaiming that anymore. Who knows? But well, why is this done? And is there a spiritual meaning that we can take away from that?
Yeah, I think that much as we mentioned before, that we celebrate Christmas on December 25th because Jesus died on March 25th. The whole, just like the whole week revolves around Sunday, the whole year takes its bearings from the Paschal Mystery of Christ, celebrated around, on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox, so around March 25th. So it's, as Alexis wrote in her chapter, it's not just a reminder, it's a sacramental expression of, hey, the reason that we're celebrating Epiphany and Christmas is so that Jesus can die and rise. Don't get confused about that, bringing us back to that. And this text is in the Missal today and can be done. And I've never heard it proclaimed. So maybe this will be on another of my New Year's resolutions. But, while we're searching for new, neat, cool things to do, well, there's a whole bunch of things that are legit and traditional and contemporary and in the book right now that we should try those first before going on to try other things that they're not of the mind of the Church.
Maybe we can talk a little bit more, Christopher, about some of the theological themes that we can reflect on for Epiphany.
Yeah, well, what's Epiphany mean? To shine out. Epiphanos, I suppose, means to shine away, to reveal. And that is kind of the real theme, is this, if Jesus is born with limited people, in a stable, with the representation of the Magi is this revelation of the mystery to the whole world, this Epiphany. And so that seems to be, the real theme, the revelation of the plan of the mystery. So this term mystery is one that comes up all the time in liturgical and sacramental theology. And it doesn't mean necessarily something that's mysterious as in hidden or kept back or unknown or something like that. True, the plan in God the Father's mind is bigger than any of us individually or collectively can figure out. But God's not trying to keep that a secret. Quite the contrary. This is the whole point of the relationship with the chosen people, and the sending of Christ is to proclaim from the rooftops this secret, this great plan of the mystery, how despite Adam's fall and humanity's fall and our individual sins, that God has sent a Redeemer to bring us back to him. That's not a mystery that's supposed to be kept, from other people. It's supposed to be proclaimed. And that's the gist, the substance of the Epiphany. And so all these themes about light and enlightenment and looking towards the East. I mean, the more I think about this little side about these ad orientem debates that you may or may not be a part of. I mean, it just seems to make all the liturgical sense in the world that the wise men come from the East representing us, and the announcement goes out to the East. And again, I wrote in this chapter, and this is one of the things I learned, is the stational church, where the Pope would say Mass on the Epiphany was St. Peter's. I mean, just think about, it's this church with its arms opened toward, it's oriented, isn't it, Denis? Or it's rather flipped around. It's
reversed oriented, yeah.
Yeah, so the arms are reaching out towards the East, towards the Gentile people. And so, the substance of the mystery of the day is the revelation of this mystery to every creature who's has ears to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the artwork then for this solemnity that you selected, Denis. And this is The Adoration of the Magi by Domenico Ghirlandaio.
It sure is. And I realized that I fell in love with a lot of 15th century paintings. Everything we've talked about so far has been in the 15th century. And part of the reason is there's a kind of like real direct realism to it, and then this high level of symbolic meaning as well. And this one's very complex. When you look at it, you're like, okay, is there an epiphany in here? Which ones are kings? Which ones are people? Mm-hmm. It's this mix of Florentine donors who are actually in there. You have St. Joseph, the Virgin Mary, the usual things, but there are also these secondary narratives. So maybe the first thing you see at the top is the angels, and they're singing Gloria in Excelsis Deo, and it's actually singable. Gregorian notation has its fa clef there, and you can actually sing it just as it's written. It's, real serious music. And of course, this is the song of the angels, the glory to God in the highest that you hear about mentioned in Scripture. On the right-hand side is an arch with the date of the painting on top. And there's a little tiny angel in the center of that arch who's the one who proclaims to the shepherds. So the shepherds are up in the hills. You can hardly see them in the painting. They're very small, but they're little sheep there, and the one that's saying, there were shepherds abiding in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night. Now, the interesting thing about this painting, it was actually painted for a place in Florence called the Hospital of the Innocents, and it was an orphanage. So, it's not a hospital for sick children. It was more, a place for care of sick children. And it's a famous building, early Renaissance building. But this was in the chapel. So there are these, of course, it makes sense. These are children who have no parents, and they're looking at, the Madonna and St. Joseph and the child Christ. But there's this secondary narrative. So on the left side of the kind of structure in the background, you see these people racing in like a angry parade with men with swords. That's the children, being murdered, the innocents, the real innocents, right? The holy innocents at Herod's claim. So they're the first martyrs of the church, these children. And so in a way, it gives these children in this chapel something to ponder. Well, I don't have a parent and I'm suffering, can they join their prayer with the martyrs, the first martyrs of the church? And in fact, at the very bottom of the painting, it's crowded with all these immaculately dressed figures, but there are two little guys in white at the very bottom of the painting with these sort of bursts of light, or these halos over their heads. And these are two of the holy innocents. And if you look closely, you can see their throats have been slashed, and they're, adoring the Christ child too. So there's this very human side to this, right? Where these children are pondering their own suffering without having a family. And then as you wade through all of these figures, on the right hand, you see the Virgin Mary in the center, the Christ child on her lap. And then over her left shoulder is St. Joseph. He's in blue and yellow, and he looks very old, which is the tradition. Theoretically, if he's old enough, he wouldn't have all those youthful passions and would not have challenged her purity. So that's a long convention there. But to the right of St. Joseph are these guys in big hats. There's a guy with a big blue hat and a red hat. These are the patrons of the hospital. They paid for it. So they're real Florentine people who are there, a little haughtily maybe, with their hand on their hip. But the interesting thing in a pre-Marxist world was if you were rich, you were expected to take care of the poor. You were expected to build churches. You were expected to support monasteries, and your name would go on them. And you see this in Rome all the time. It says Farnese or Medici on the front of a church instead of the saint it's dedicated to, because this is the way that they weren't just hogging their wealth all to themselves.
Right.
And so this is a thing about the Renaissance, is the secular realm starts to take place in its place. And so right behind the Virgin Mary, there's these two little guys dressed in black right behind that brick wall. And the one on the left is some kind of black-robed friar, and the one on the right with his collar open is a layman. And so what they're saying now is the union of the civic realm and the sacred realm, because this hospital was funded by the silk merchants of Florence. It was run probably by religious, but it was funded by laity. And so this was a new thing at the time, this new union church and state, I suppose you could say. This is a time when they get interested in city planning again and making the city of God and the city, of the earth kind of be the same place. And the priest who was in charge of the kids and who commissioned the painting is over there on the left. He's the second from the left. There's a guy with a big red hat on, and it's coming down his shoulders. There's a very simply dressed priest in black looking toward his right. Our left, that's the priest who commissioned the painting, and just to his right is a guy with a red collar, long hair, and he's looking out at an angle. That's the picture of Ghirlandaio himself. So he put his own self-portrait in there. And you might say, okay, where are the kings? There's so many figures here. One of them is just to the left of the ox. He's got a blue garment on with a yellow cape over his shoulder, and he's holding a glass chalice. So this is one of the gifts for the Christ child. One of them is down below, kissing his feet. He's got the long white hair. And then there's another one to his right, in a kind of purple garment with a cape. It's holding a canister of sort of myrrh or frankincense, I suppose. And the interesting thing that they do here when you're, a smart person is they put the ages of man here. So the old guy kissing his feet is the old man. The one to his right with the golden canister is the middle-aged man. The one that we saw first on the left with the long sort of golden hair is the youth. And then Christ himself is the infant. And these were the 4 ages of man that were kind of a thing you would study to say, okay, well, there's youth, there's the robust youth, there's infancy, then there's the robust youth of maturity, and then middle age, and then old age, right? This is all preparation for life and death. And so the kings doubled in this way, this allegory of the 4 ages of man, and as a way to manifest your preparation for death. And then John the Baptist is over on the left too, with his cross, and then Saint John over there on the far right. So you have the 2 Johns, the kings, the wise men, the people of Florence, the painter, the priest who commissioned it, the murder of the innocents, the laity, the rich, the poor. It's just a really fabulous thing to try to decode and understand.
Okay, well, is there anything else you guys would like to say before we wrap up? Isn't there like a video series or something that Ascension is doing associated with this book?
Well, yeah, actually, it's coming through Benedictine College, through the Ex Corde Center for Media, in conjunction with the book. It's called The Sacred Image. And we're just going to walk through every one of these paintings in the book, and also others, outside this book, over the next year or two. We've only done a few so far. The first one was released on December 8th for the Immaculate Conception, and you can find it easily on YouTube. If you put in Denis McNamara Sacred Image, it'll come up. There'll be one on the Nativity, December 19th. It'll be released. And then probably every month or so, there'll be a new one coming out. And it's me talking, just like we're talking here, decoding the different things in the painting, but together with a kind of enlivened image, and they highlight and move around. It's really fun to make, and hopefully will be great for people to watch. It's 5 or 6 minutes each.
Anything else we should mention before we're going?
Well, I always like to say, hey, God loves us. He wants us to return to him. And he doesn't just say, sit in the corner and ponder me, or else I'll fry you, right? He says, I'm going to love you into loving me. I'm going to let you hear lovely music and smell lovely incense and look at lovely flowers and eat cookies on Christmas and get presents and ponder these great mysteries, and to see liturgy and the liturgical year not merely as obligation. I often think we should say holy days of opportunity, instead of holy days of obligation, right? If you don't go, it's a mortal sin. Well, if you don't win the lottery, is it a mortal sin? Or is it way better to say you get to win the lottery, or you get to receive this grace that transforms you? And since, we're all living in this age of isolation and social media and depression and all kinds of things going on, to say, okay, well, here is this way to connect with the past, to connect with the future, to the saints that will be your companions someday, and to ponder the mysteries of the church, and to think about this in a real opportunity language, in a real positive way.
Yeah, great. Well, Denis and Christopher, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
my pleasure. Thank you.
Again, the book is Solemnities, Celebrating a Tapestry of Divine Beauty, and I'll link to that in the show notes. Highly recommend picking that up. Make a good gift, actually. And I'll also link to the video series that we just mentioned with Benedictine College. So this is the last episode before Christmas. So I will wish my listeners a blessed Advent and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I'll see you sometime in January. Thanks, and God bless.